My name is Clara Sterling. I am 73 years old, and on the night of our 50th wedding anniversary, in front of 100 of our closest friends and colleagues, my only son publicly executed my freedom. The party was in full swing. Crystal chandeliers in the country club ballroom glittered like constellations, the soft melody of a string quartet, weaving through the pleasant hum of conversation. My husband Arthur sat beside me, his eyes shining with a happy, gentle fatigue. I was smiling a practiced smile I've spent a lifetime perfecting to mask the storms within. I knew this night was more than a celebration. It was a stage, and the main act had yet to begin. And then it did. David, my son, the heir to the Sterling Homes empire we had spent our lives building, stepped onto the stage. He tapped the microphone, and an immediate hush fell over the room. He wasn't smiling. His face was a carefully constructed mask of solemnity and a pained sort of love. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and family," he began, his voice resonating with false emotion. "This is a joyous day, but there is a serious matter that as a son, I can no longer remain silent about." A nervous curiosity rippled through the guests. I kept my hand steady as I placed my wine glass back on the table. He looked directly at me. His eyes were not those of a loving son, but of a doctor about to deliver a devastating diagnosis. We all love my mother. It is because of that deep and abiding love that we must be brave enough to face the truth. Recently, her health, and most significantly her memory, have been in a worrying decline. Whispers erupted, slithering through the crowd like snakes. I felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up my neck. He was painting me as senile, as someone who needed to be protected from herself. But the cruelest blow was yet to come. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled something out. Not a gift, not a speech. It was the key fob to my Jaguar, along with my platinum American Express cards. They were symbols of my independence. He held them up for everyone to see, glinting under the chandeliers like a hangman's axe. For her own safety, and for the safety of others, he said, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion, a masterful performance down to the last detail. "As of today, my wife and I will be taking over Mom's driving privileges and her financial responsibilities." The room went dead silent. It was a slap. Not to my face, but to my very soul, my dignity. He had just in one fell swoop publicly reduced me from a matriarch, the co-founder of an empire, to a doddering old woman. A liability, a child to be managed. And the woman now walking towards me, her eyes filled with false pity, and a viper's smile, was his wife, Sophia. She approached, taking the keys and cards from David's hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She didn't look at me. She simply slipped them into her Chanel handbag, a gesture of profound symbolism. My freedom and financial autonomy now resided in her purse. Then she turned and leaned down beside my chair. "Don't you worry, Clara," she said, "the use of my first name instead of Mom," a subtle, calculated insult. Her voice was sweet as honey, but loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "From now on, if you need anything at all, you just have to ask me." I looked deep into her eyes, and I saw no sympathy. I saw the sick, triumphant glee of a usurper. A cold, quiet rage began to build inside me. I thought of that Jaguar. It wasn't my most expensive car, but it was the first one I had bought myself with the commission from the first major contract I landed on my own without Arthur's help. It was proof that I was more than just Arthur Sterling's wife. I was Clara Sterling. I knew I had to play the part. I rose slowly, my face a mask of shock and hurt. I didn't look at David or Sophia. I turned to Arthur. I took his hand. "I'm a little tired," I said softly. "I need to rest for a moment." I began to walk away. As I passed the tables, I heard the whispers. "Poor Clara. She looks so lost. David is such a good son, having to make such a difficult choice for her." Their lies were spreading like a virus. But the moment the heavy oak doors of the powder room closed behind me, shutting out the world they had created, my pained expression vanished. I walked to the grand, ornate mirror. The woman looking back at me had silver hair and the fine lines of time etched on her face, but her eyes were ageless. They were burning with a cold, calculating fire. I whispered to my reflection, "They think they're putting me in a cage. They've forgotten I'm the one who designed it." Their performance was good, but they had no idea I was the one who would be writing the final act. When the people you love most seek not only to take what is yours, but to strip you of your very dignity and independence in front of the world, is forgiveness still an option? Or is it time to remind them who you really are? The moment the powder room door clicked shut, I allowed myself 5 seconds. 5 seconds to take a single deep breath, letting the fire in my chest cool into a hard, sharp core of ice. 5 seconds to look at the woman in the mirror, a stranger in an elegant evening gown, and give her an order. Act Clara. Give the performance of a lifetime. Then I opened the door and stepped back out. The transformation was immediate. My spine, usually ramrod straight, curved into a subtle stoop. My gait, once confident and purposeful, became a hesitant, uncertain shuffle. I brought a hand to my temple as if plagued by a sudden headache. The resolute expression from the mirror vanished, replaced by a look of bewildered vulnerability, perfectly suited to the role of a matriarch publicly stripped of her dignity. Arthur rushed to my side, his face etched with genuine concern. "Are you all right, Clara?" I'm fine." I managed my voice frail. "Just a little dizzy. Perhaps David is right. Perhaps I'm not as sharp as I used to be." I made sure to say it just loud enough for the guests at a nearby table to overhear. I saw them exchange pitying glances. Good. The stage was set. Across the room, David and Sophia were the center of a circle of key investors. I could see David talking animatedly, gesturing with his hands. He was cementing his narrative, turning his cruel act into one of filial duty. A smirk of satisfaction touched his lips as he saw me leaning on Arthur's arm for support. He thought he had won. He thought the lioness had been declawed. I needed to get closer. "Arthur, I need to sit for a moment," I said, letting him guide me to an empty armchair near where David was holding court. As I sank into the chair, I feigned a slight tremor in my hands. Pinned to the lapel of my dress was my diamond phoenix brooch. Arthur had given it to me on our 30th anniversary after a business crisis that nearly ruined us. He said it was a symbol of rising from the ashes. Tonight it served a different purpose. It was not merely jewelry. It was a weapon. A sophisticated miniature recording device listening silently. David and Sophia concluded their conversation and came over to me. "Feeling better, Mother?" David asked, his tone dripping with the condescension of a parent speaking to a difficult child. I don't know, dear," I replied, looking up at him with clouded eyes. "Everything seems a little strange." I intentionally fumbled my words, leaning into the part. Sophia leaned down, her expensive perfume assaulting my senses. "You just need to rest. We'll take care of everything." Then she turned slightly, whispering to David, assuming I either wouldn't hear or wouldn't comprehend. "You see, I told you. She's completely gone. This is going to be even easier than I thought." David gave a slight satisfied nod. "Just let her sit there. The more people see her like this, the more they'll support our decision." My phoenix brooch recorded it all, every last word. While I played the part of a confused old woman, my mind was a razor-sharp archive of the past. I remembered 10 years ago, David, then young and full of arrogant ambition, had convinced us to give him full control of a high-end lakeside condo development. It was the vision of the new generation, he'd claimed. We had hesitated but finally agreed, hoping the responsibility would temper him. It was a catastrophe. He overspent, made impulsive design choices, and ignored the advice of seasoned engineers. The project hemorrhaged money. To save it and the reputation of Sterling Homes, Arthur and I had to sell a portfolio of commercial properties we'd spent 30 years acquiring. I will never forget the conversation in Arthur's study afterward. Arthur, with a father's patience, had said, "A man learns from his mistakes, son." David, instead of showing remorse, had replied with a voice full of bitter resentment, A man learns when he's given the freedom to make his own decisions, not when he's watched over like a child. I saw it then. Not ambition, but entitlement. A toxic resentment at feeling he deserved everything without earning it. He didn't want to learn from us. He wanted to replace us. That failure didn't teach him humility. It planted a seed of vengeance in his heart, a resolve that the next time he wouldn't let anyone stand in his way. And that next time was tonight. I took a deep breath, pulling myself back to the present. I needed to plant a seed of my own, a small seed of doubt in just the right fertile soil. I saw Arthur's cousin Eleanor, a sharp and intelligent woman, watching me from across the room. I gave her a weak, beckoning gesture. "Clara, are you okay?" Eleanor asked, her concern genuine. I took her hand. My voice a conspiratorial whisper, as if sharing a shameful secret. "Eleanor, I'm so glad you're here. I feel so lost. David and Sophia are handling everything. They're so brilliant, of course." I paused, then added with a sigh, "I just hope they know what they're doing with the company's finances. It's all so complicated now. I can't keep up anymore." I hadn't accused. I hadn't complained. I had simply played the part of a worried old woman planting a sophisticated question in Eleanor's mind. Are David and Sophia truly competent enough to manage an empire? Eleanor looked at me then, across at David, who was now laughing loudly with an investor. I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. The seed was planted. Have you ever had to feign weakness to hide your true strength? And in that moment, did you feel powerless or powerful? I retreated to the powder room, a palatial space of marble and gold fixtures that felt more like a mausoleum than a restroom. The moment the door clicked shut, the mask of the frail, confused old woman fell away. I looked at my reflection. The woman staring back was not lost. She was at war. I bypassed my own evening bag, reaching instead into a hidden pocket sewn into the lining of my coat, which I'd asked a waiter to bring me. From it, I produced a slim, featureless burner phone. There was only one number programmed into it. I pressed the call button. He answered on the first ring. "Robert," I said, my voice low and steady, stripped of all the quavering weakness I had displayed moments before. "Clara, I've been waiting for your call. Are you all right?" Robert's voice was warm with a concern that was entirely genuine. Robert wasn't just the CFO of Sterling Homes. He was family in a way that my own son, it seemed, no longer was. My mind flashed back 15 years. I was in a sterile hospital waiting room, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and fear. Robert was sitting opposite me, his head in his hands, a broken man. His young daughter, Emily, had been diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia, and the experimental treatment she needed wasn't covered by his insurance. The cost was astronomical. I remembered sitting beside him, not as his boss, but as a mother. I took his hand and said, "She's our daughter too, Robert. We will not let her fall." Arthur and I paid for everything, every treatment, every specialist. Today, Emily is a vibrant young lawyer with a family of her own. Robert's loyalty to the Sterlings wasn't transactional. It was forged in the fires of life and death. He was the one person on this earth I could trust without question. "I'm fine, Robert," I said, pulling myself back to the cold marble present. "They've made their move. It was as public and humiliating as possible. Now tell me what you found. I need the truth, and I need it unvarnished." There was a rustle of papers on his end. When he spoke again, his voice was all business. "Clara, it's worse than we thought. David has been moving assets for months, but he's been clever about it. He created a shell LLC called Apex Holdings. He's used the company's primary real estate assets, the downtown tower, and the waterfront development as collateral for a high-risk bridge loan. Ice flowed through my veins. A bridge loan. A short-term, high-interest loan used to cover a gap until a more permanent financing solution could be found. It was a gambler's move, from whom I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. A private equity firm out of Boston. They're essentially corporate raiders, the kind of people who pick a company's bones clean and sell the scraps. He paused, and I could hear the gravity in his next words. "The payment is due this Friday at 5 p.m. If we default, they seize the collateral. They seize the heart of Sterling homes. This Friday, they had given me less than a week. It all clicked into place. The public humiliation wasn't just an act of cruelty, it was a strategy. They needed to establish me as mentally incompetent so that when they started liquidating the company, no one would listen to my protests. They weren't planning a takeover, they were planning a demolition. He's gonna let the company default, isn't he? I said already, knowing the answer. He'll take the loan money and run, leaving us with the carcass. That's the only scenario that makes sense. Robert confirmed, his voice heavy with disgust. I closed my eyes for a moment, steadying myself against the marble vanity. This was not just about greed anymore. This was a scorched earth policy. My son was willing to burn down the entire kingdom just to get his hands on the gold, but he had forgotten about the kingdom's hidden defenses. My thoughts turned to a thick leather-bound document in our home safe, the Sterling Family Trust. I remembered the day Arthur and I signed it with our estate lawyer a decade ago. Arthur had been unusually insistent on one particular clause. It's called an incapacity and duress clause, our lawyer had explained. Arthur had looked at me. Think of it as a fortress, Clara. We build walls to protect against enemies from the outside, but the most dangerous threats sometimes come from within. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious, even a little paranoid. David was our son, after all. But Arthur, with his quiet wisdom, had seen a potential for darkness that I had refused to acknowledge. The clause was simple in its brutal efficiency. If any trustee, namely Arthur or myself, was subjected to duress, or if a credible attempt was made to declare one of us incapacitated for the purpose of financial malfeasance, this clause could be invoked. And its effect was absolute. All executive powers held by any other family member on the board would be immediately and irrevocably suspended, and sole authority would revert to the non-compromised trustee. It was a legal nuke designed for a doomsday scenario, and doomsday had arrived. Robert, I said, my voice now filled with a resolve that chased away all fear. David has made a fatal error. He believes he's attacking a feeble old woman. He has no idea he's just declared war on a queen. I ended the call. I took a moment to compose myself, reapplying my lipstick with a steady hand. I looked at my reflection one last time. The woman staring back was no longer playing a part. The performance was over. I walked back into the ballroom. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, it all sounded different now. It was the soundtrack to a battlefield. I saw David laughing with an investor, a wolf in sheep's clothing. I saw Sophia preening in her victory. They were celebrating in a city whose foundations were about to be shaken to the core, and they had no idea I was the one with my hand on the detonator. I returned to the ballroom, my face a carefully constructed mask of weary confusion. My heart, a cold, steady metronome counting down the seconds. The atmosphere had shifted. The initial shock of David's announcement had settled into a thick, cloying pity that followed me like a shroud. I could feel the whispers, the sideways glances. Poor Clara. She's really lost it. It was exactly what I wanted. Let them see a victim. A queen is never more dangerous than when her enemies believe she has been dethroned. My eyes found David. He was no longer working the room. His mission had narrowed. He was standing near the main table with Sophia and another man, a slick, silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored suit who had the predatory stillness of a shark. This wasn't one of our regular corporate lawyers. This was a specialist, a closer. The man opened a slim leather briefcase and laid a sheaf of documents on the table. Even from across the room, I could see the heavy cream-colored paper, the crisp, authoritative text. I didn't need to read them to know what they were. The final weapons of his a durable power of attorney, giving him absolute control over Arthur's personal finances, and the final amendments to the Sterling Family Trust, the ones that would write me out of my own life. David's impatience was a palpable thing. He kept glancing at Arthur, who was looking increasingly tired and overwhelmed by the evening's drama. Arthur was a brilliant man, a titan in his prime, But the slow, insidious fog of age was beginning to cloud his judgment, especially when it came to his only son. He saw a concerned child. I saw a vulture circling. The moment had come. David picked up the documents and a pen, a magnificent Mont Blanc fountain pen, the very one I had given Arthur on our 20th anniversary. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. He was using a symbol of our shared past to annihilate our future. He approached Arthur, his voice a low, persuasive murmur. "Dad." He began placing a hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Let's just get this sorted. It's just some paperwork to simplify things. For Mom's sake. So she doesn't have to worry about anything anymore. For Mom's sake." The words were a vile perversion of love, a lie so profound it almost took my breath away. I watched as Arthur, with a weary sigh, took the pen. His hand, once so strong and steady, now had a slight tremor. He trusted his son. Despite everything, a father's love is a stubborn, blinding thing. Sophia stood nearby, her smile tight with anticipation, her eyes fixed on the tip of the pen as it hovered over the signature line. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. This was the tipping point, the moment the kingdom would be signed away. It was time for my move. I rose from my chair, my movements deliberately slow and slightly unsteady, a perfect imitation of old age. I picked up a glass of deep crimson Cabernet from the table, a wine Arthur and I had discovered on a trip to Napa Valley years ago. Its rich, dark color was perfect for the task at hand. I began walking towards them, not in a rush, but with the meandering pace of someone looking for a place to rest. My internal monologue was a calm, cold litany of instructions. 3 more steps. Turn slightly. Raise the glass. Wait for him to look up. As I drew near, I smiled a warm, wifely smile. "Arthur, darling, you look exhausted." I said, my voice soft and full of concern. The timing had to be perfect. Arthur looked up from the documents, his face softening as he saw me. "Clara," he began. That was my cue. As he turned his head, I extended my hand as if to gently touch his cheek or straighten his tie, a gesture of affection I had made 1,000 times. But this time, my elbow, with pinpoint precision, connected with the base of the wine glass. The world seemed to move in slow motion. The glass tipped a graceful, inevitable arc of destruction. The dark red liquid, almost black under the ballroom lights, cascaded out. It wasn't a splash, it was a flood, a perfect silent wave of Cabernet Sauvignon that washed over the pristine, cream-colored pages. It soaked into the paper the ink of the legal clauses, blurring into illegible purple streaks. It pooled directly over the empty signature lines, a blood-red stain where Arthur's name was meant to be. A collective gasp went through the few people standing nearby. Sophia's face contorted in a silent scream of disbelief. Arthur stared bewildered at the ruined documents. I immediately brought my hands to my mouth, my face a mask of theatrical horror. "Oh my goodness!" I exclaimed, my voice trembling with expertly feigned shock. "Arthur, I am so dreadfully sorry. How clumsy of me. My hands, they just don't work like they used to." I looked down at the mess, my eyes wide with apology. "I've ruined everything." David didn't move. He just stood there staring at the wine-soaked papers. I watched the color drain from his face, replaced by a dark mottled red of pure, unadulterated fury. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw no love for his mother, no concern for her clumsiness. I saw pure hatred. He knew. In that moment, he knew it was no accident. But he was trapped. The entire room had just witnessed his frail, confused mother have a clumsy moment. How could he possibly scream at her? How could he accuse her? He was caught in the web of the very narrative he himself had so carefully constructed. He forced his lips into a grotesque semblance of a smile. It's all right, Mother." He ground out each word, costing him an immense effort. "It was just an accident." I looked at him, my eyes still wide and apologetic. "Oh, thank you, dear," I said, my voice dripping with relief. "You're such a good son." I had not won the war, but I had just won a crucial battle, and I had done it not with a lawyer or a contract, but with a glass of wine and a well-rehearsed performance. I had bought myself time, and time I knew was a weapon he could not defend against. The air in the ballroom was thick with unspoken tension. My accident had been a perfectly thrown stone into a still pond, and the ripples were spreading. David was a thundercloud of contained rage forced to accept condolences for my frailty, while his eyes shot daggers at me. Sophia, ever the performer, was fluttering around trying to smooth over the disruption, her smile stretched thin over a canvas of pure panic. The lawyer there, closer, had quietly packed his briefcase, the opportunity lost for now. They were furious, but they were also off balance, and that was precisely where I wanted them. I knew I couldn't let that instability go to waste. I needed to isolate the weaker of the two to pry open the cracks that had just appeared in their united front. Leaning heavily on Arthur's arm, I let out a soft sigh. Darling, I think I need to sit in a quieter room for a moment. All this commotion. I let my voice trail off a picture of weary fragility. Sophia immediately saw her chance to appear as the dutiful daughter-in-law. "Of course, Clara," she said, rushing to my other side. "Let me help you. There's a lovely sitting room just off the main hall." "Oh, would you, dear? You're so kind," I murmured, allowing her to guide me away from the noise. David watched us go, his expression a mixture of suspicion and frustration. He couldn't object without looking like a monster. The sitting room was an oasis of calm filled with plush velvet armchairs and the scent of old leather-bound books. Sophia helped me into a chair and was about to make her excuses to leave, but I kept a gentle but firm hold on her hand. "Stay with me for a moment, Sophia," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Please." She sat a little reluctantly in the chair opposite me. The mask of concern was still in place, but her eyes were wary. I looked at her not with anger, but with a carefully crafted expression of maternal sadness. "Sophia," I began, my voice soft, "I know this evening has been difficult, and I know you think I'm just a confused old woman." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But I know my son. I raised him." I leaned forward slightly, my gaze intense. "He has his father's ambition, but he lacks his father's integrity. When things go wrong, when the walls start to close in, David has never once in his life taken the blame. He always finds someone else to carry the fault. Always." Sophia's posture stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Don't you?" I asked gently. "You are a beautiful, intelligent, and incredibly ambitious woman. You've hitched your wagon to his star, but have you ever truly asked yourself, are you his partner, or are you his most valuable asset, an asset he would be willing to liquidate to sacrifice if it meant saving himself?" I let that sink in. I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. I had just articulated her deepest unspoken fear. "He's my son, and I love him." I lied the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "But I've seen him do this before. He will charm you, use you, and when you are no longer useful or have become a liability, he will cut you loose without a second thought. And he will do it in a way that makes everyone believe it was your fault all along." I looked down at my hands. He learned that from watching his grandfather, not from me. I looked back up at her, my eyes filled with feigned pity. "He needed those papers signed tonight. Now they are ruined. He will be looking for someone to blame for this failure. Who do you think that will be?" She stood up abruptly, her face pale. "You're trying to manipulate me." "No, my dear," I said, my voice calm and sad. "I'm trying to warn you." She left the room without another word, not with the confident stride she had entered with, but with the hurried, agitated steps of someone whose world had just been shaken. The first crack had become a fissure. Now for David. I made my way back to the edge of the ballroom, finding a discreet alcove where I could sit partially hidden by a large potted fern. From here, I had a clear view of the terrace, and there he was. He was no longer pretending. His rage was radiating off him in palpable waves. He was with his uncle Arthur's younger brother Richard, a weak man who had always been jealous of his brother's success and was easily manipulated by David's promises of power. I pressed the small discreet button on my Phoenix brooch. The device was voice-activated, but I wanted to be certain. She did it on purpose, I'm telling you. David's voice was a low, vicious snarl that carried across the quiet terrace. That old bat? She thinks she's clever. Calm down, David. Richard's voice was nervous. Someone will hear you. I don't care. David spat, taking a gulp of whiskey from a glass. This just delays the inevitable. I'm not my father. I don't operate on sentiment. He and my mother are sentimental fools. They built a museum, a monument to their own past. I'm trying to build an empire even if it has to be on top of their ruins. There it was, the confession I needed, but he wasn't finished. She's a liability. David continued, his voice dripping with venom. Her and her memories of how things used to be. The board still listens to her. That's why we had to make a move tonight. Once she's legally declared incompetent, her voice becomes nothing more than the rambling of a senile old woman. She can't hurt us then. The loan, David, Richard began, but David cut him off. The loan is a tool, a means to an end. Once I have full control, I'll leverage what's left, pay off the loan sharks, and rebuild everything in my own image. Without them. Without their ghosts in every corridor. He took another drink. She thinks she won tonight. All she did was sign her own committal papers. I pressed the button on my brooch again, stopping the recording. I had it. His motive, his plan, his utter contemptuous disregard for us. It was all there captured in crystal clear audio. I sat back in the shadows of the alcove. A slow, cold smile touched my lips. The evening had started with David taking my keys, stripping me of my power. But now I held the real keys. I held the key to Sophia's paranoia, and I held the key to David's self-destruction. He thought he was building an empire. He had no idea he had just handed me the blueprints to its ruin. The huntress had all the weapons she needed. Now all she had to do was wait for the perfect moment to spring the trap. The seeds of paranoia I had planted in the sitting room bore fruit faster than I could have imagined. Sophia returned to the ballroom not as David's elegant partner, but as a cornered animal. I watched from my alcove as she confronted him near the bar, her whispers sharp and frantic. David's face, already a mask of fury, darkened further. He tried to placate her to pull her back into line, but the poison of my words was already at work. She no longer trusted him. He was losing control. And a man like David, when he loses control, does not retreat. He attacks. He strode to the stage, practically wrenching the microphone from the hand of the startled band leader. The music sputtered and died. A nervous silence fell over the room for the second time that night. But this time, there was no pretense of love or concern in his posture. This was pure aggression. A moment of your time. He said, his voice tight and dangerously loud. He didn't wait for it. It seems my mother's condition is more advanced than we feared. She is not merely forgetful, she is becoming destructive, malicious. He pointed a trembling finger at me, sitting in the shadows. The spotlight of 100 pairs of eyes swung to find me. She deliberately ruined those documents tonight. It was an act of sabotage born out of a senile fantasy that we are somehow trying to harm her. It breaks my heart to say this, but she has become a danger to herself and to the stability of the company we all depend on. He had done it. He had thrown his last desperate card on the table, hoping to paint me as the villain, the crazy old woman in the attic. He was trying to turn my strategic move into evidence for his case against me. It was a bold gambit, and it was the single greatest mistake of his life. I let his words hang in the air, letting the poison of them seep into the room. I let the guests exchange uncomfortable glances. I let him stand there exposed in his own ugly desperation. Then I stood up. I didn't rush. I walked from the alcove into the light, my posture erect, my steps measured and sure. I was no longer the frail, confused woman. I was Clara Sterling, and I had come to reclaim my house. I walked to the stage, stopping a few feet from him. I didn't address him. I addressed our audience. My son has made some very serious accusations. I said, my voice calm and clear, carrying easily through the silent room without the aid of a microphone. He speaks of my stability, my competence. I believe in matters of business, it is best to consult with experts. My eyes scanned the crowd and found him. "Robert," I called out. "Robert Landon, would you please stand?" Robert, our CFO, stood from his table. He was a man universally respected for his integrity and quiet competence. His presence alone commanded attention. "Robert," I continued, "you have been the Chief Financial Officer of Sterling Homes for 30 years. You have worked with me side by side through recessions, booms, and crises. You see the numbers. You see my directives. You see my work every single day." I paused, holding the entire room in suspense. "Tell me, Robert, in your professional opinion, do you consider me senile?" Robert looked from me to David, his expression unreadable. David stared at him, his eyes blazing with a silent, desperate command. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the ice machines from the bar. "No, Mrs. Sterling," Robert said, his voice resonating with unshakable authority. "I do not. I consider you to be the sharpest, most astute leader I have ever had the privilege of working for. And I consider you to be the only person who saw the profound financial danger our company is currently in." A wave of murmurs rippled through the audience. David's face went white. "He's lying," David shouted into the microphone, his voice cracking. "She's gotten to him. He's part of her delusion." "A delusion?" I asked softly before turning to two other guests. Mrs. Albright from Morgan Stanley, Mr. Chen from our Singapore investment group. My apologies for discussing business at a social event, but my son insists. I gave a slight nod to Robert. Robert walked over and handed each of them a slim, nondescript file folder. "A brief summary of my most recent audit requested by Mrs. Sterling last week," Robert announced. "You will find details of a Shell LLC and unauthorized high-risk loan and collateral agreements that have put the entire company at risk of liquidation in less than 48 hours, all authorized by Mr. David Sterling without board knowledge or approval." Mrs. Albright's eyes widened as she scanned the first page. Mr. Chen took out his glasses, his expression turning to stone. David was cornered. He dropped all pretense. "Lies," he roared. "Fabricated documents. She is a manipulative, vindictive old woman trying to burn it all down because she can't stand to let go of control. Control." I repeated, my voice still quiet, yet it cut through his rage like a surgeon's scalpel. "David, I believe it's always best to let a man speak for himself." I reached up and touched the phoenix brooch on my dress. I pressed the button, and then his own voice filled the room, captured in perfect digital clarity. "She's a liability. Her and her memories of how things used to be. The board still listens to her. That's why we had to make a move tonight. Once she's legally declared incompetent, her voice becomes nothing more than the rambling of a senile old woman." The recording played on. The room was utterly, profoundly silent, save for the sound of my son's voice condemning himself with every venomous word about his sentimental fool of a father, about building his empire on our ruins, about the loan sharks, about all of it. When the recording finished, I let the silence stretch for a full 10 seconds. David stood frozen, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief and horror. He looked like a man who had just witnessed his own ghost. Finally, I turned my attention to the last key player, a small, unassuming man in the corner who had been trying to make himself invisible all night, Mr. Davies, our longtime family estate lawyer. "Mr. Davies," I said, my voice resonating with the cold, hard finality of a judge's gavel. "Based on the clear and present evidence of financial malfeasance, presented by our CFO and the undeniable evidence of duress and intent to fraudulently declare incapacitation captured on this recording, I am now formally invoking the Incapacity and Duress Clause, Section 7, Paragraph 4 of the Sterling Family Trust. I took a step closer to my son, my eyes locking onto his. Effective immediately, all executive powers, all board positions, and all voting rights held by David Sterling are hereby suspended, indefinitely. I did not shout, I did not cry, I simply stated a fact. Checkmate. The word checkmate did not echo. It landed. It settled over the grand ballroom with the weight and finality of a coffin lid closing. For a long moment, the world was a photograph. David stood frozen on the stage, his face a canvas of utter ruin. Sophia near the bar looked as though she had been turned to stone, her hand clutching a champagne flute so tightly I was surprised it didn't shatter. The guests, our friends and colleagues of 50 years, were statues in their chairs, their faces a mixture of shock, awe, and a dawning, terrible understanding. Then the photograph came to life. Not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, devastating movements. The dominoes began to fall. Mrs. Albright, the formidable head of our private banking division at Morgan Stanley, did not gasp or whisper. She simply reached into her evening bag, produced her phone, and turned her back to the stage, creating a small bubble of professional privacy. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, but carried the chilling efficiency of a guillotine. "Mark, it's Evelyn Albright." She said, her tone devoid of all emotion. "Initiate a full asset freeze on all accounts, personal and corporate, linked to David Sterling Homes and a shell entity called Apex Holdings. Yes, effective immediately. And cancel all lines of credit. I'll forward the authorization." She ended the call, slipped her phone back into her bag, and took a calm sip of water. Her work done. The financial artery had been severed. Across the room, Mr. Chen, the usually jovial head of our Singapore investment group, was no longer smiling. He spoke in rapid, low Mandarin to the two associates at his table. Though I didn't understand the words, I understood the intent. He then stood his back ramrod straight and announced to his table, but loud enough for those nearby to hear, "There will be an emergency virtual meeting of the board at 9 a.m. tomorrow, Singapore time. A motion for a full independent forensic audit will be the first and only item on the agenda." The corporate power structure was realigning itself before my very eyes. And Mr. Davies, our quiet family lawyer who had tried so hard to be invisible, was now a focal point. He gave me a single slow nod of grim confirmation. He approached Robert, who had remained standing like a sentinel. "My office will have the official injunctions drafted and filed before the courts open tomorrow morning." He said, his voice the dry rustle of legal paper. "Ensure all company servers, especially the executive servers, are secured immediately. No one enters or leaves David's office." The legal cage was being locked. The allies, the vultures who had been circling, began to scatter. I saw Uncle Richard trying to slip out a side door, only to find it quietly blocked by a member of the club's security staff who had been discreetly summoned by Robert. He turned back, trapped his face, pale and sweating. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Others who had laughed at David's jokes and nodded at his lies now found their dinner plates incredibly fascinating, suddenly desperate to become part of the wallpaper. Their loyalty bought so cheaply had evaporated just as quickly. And Sophia, her survival instincts were razor sharp. I saw the calculation in her eyes as she looked at David, a broken, useless thing on the stage. She was no longer his partner. She was a co-conspirator looking for an exit. She turned her movements quick and furtive and began to walk towards the main entrance. She too was met by a polite but unmovable security guard. Her face for the first time registered pure animal terror. The trap had closed on her as well. But my attention was on my son. David did not rage. He did not weep. The fight had gone out of him, extinguished in an instant. It was as if the puppeteer's strings had been cut and he had collapsed into a heap of himself. He stumbled backward, his hand knocking over the microphone stand, which fell with a loud metallic clang that seemed to break the spell over the room. He didn't seem to notice. His eyes, wide and vacant, were fixed on me. He wasn't seeing his mother. He was seeing the architect. He was seeing the game board from above for the very first time, and finally understanding that he had never been a player. He had been a piece. The bravado, the arrogance, the lifetime of simmering resentment. It all just evaporated, leaving behind something hollow and shockingly small. He was no longer a titan or a tyrant. He was just a boy who had tried to wear his father's shoes and had tripped over the laces in front of the entire world. The collapse was not physical. It was absolute, a disintegration of the soul. I felt a gentle hand on my arm. It was Arthur. He had made his way to my side, his expression a storm of confusion, pain, and a fierce, unwavering pride. He didn't understand all the financial intricacies or the legal clauses, but he understood the battle. He understood that I had protected our home. I turned away from the wreckage of my son and took my husband's hand. The party was over. The celebration had become a reckoning, and I, Clara Sterling, was no longer just the matriarch of the family. I was the receiver appointed to oversee the liquidation of my son's ambition. The long, difficult work of cleaning up the mess was about to begin. The wreckage of my son's ambition lay smoldering in the center of the grand ballroom, but I did not linger to survey the damage. My work was not about destruction, it was about preservation. With Arthur's hand held firmly in mine, I turned away from the frozen tableau of David's ruin. He was a problem for another day, a piece of corporate rot to be excised. Tonight was about re-establishing order. I did not go home, not yet. Instead, I led Arthur to the quiet sitting room where I had planted the seeds of doubt in Sophia. Robert, Mr. Davies, Mrs. Albright, and Mr. Chen followed us in their expressions grim and businesslike. The party was over. The board meeting had begun. I did not take a seat. I stood before them, Arthur seated in an armchair beside me, his presence a silent, unwavering endorsement. I was no longer a mother betrayed or a wife avenging her husband. I was the co-founder of Sterling Homes, and I was taking command. First, I began my voice clear and devoid of emotion. Thank you for your discretion and your swift action. What happened out there was a necessary but unpleasant piece of corporate surgery. I looked directly at Mrs. Albright. Evelyn, your freeze on the assets is critical. Robert will work with your team first thing in the morning to begin untangling the web David created. We need a clear picture of the liabilities incurred by this unauthorized venture. Then to Mr. Chen. Where your call for a forensic audit is exactly the right move. I want it to be thorough, independent, and ruthless. Every transaction, every email, every contract signed by David in the last 2 years will be scrutinized. We will project strength through transparency. We have nothing to hide. Finally, I turn to our lawyer. Mr. Davies, the legal proceedings will be twofold. First, securing the company against any further damage. Second, pursuing personal charges against David Sterling and any co-conspirators for fraud and embezzlement. There will be no quiet family settlements. This will be handled by the book. There was a moment of silence. These were hard, cold decisions, but they were the right ones. I saw a look of profound respect in their eyes. They weren't looking at a grieving mother. They were looking at a queen, reclaiming her throne. Clara, Mrs. Albright, said, her voice a low murmur of approval. The market will be volatile tomorrow when this news breaks. What is your message to our investors? My message is simple, I said without hesitation. Sterling Homes was built on a foundation of integrity and quality by Arthur and myself over 50 years. That foundation remains unshaken. A diseased branch has been pruned to save the tree. The company is and will remain in the hands of its founders. We are not going anywhere. After the impromptu meeting concluded as Robert and the security staff managed the quiet, humiliating dispersal of the remaining guests, including a now sobbing Sophia, being escorted to a waiting car to meet with her lawyers, Arthur and I finally went home. The car ride was silent. We drove through the city past the gleaming office towers and elegant residential buildings, so many of which we had built. They were more than steel and glass. They were chapters of our life together. When we arrived back at our house, the first one we ever built for ourselves, Arthur asked the driver to wait. He led me not into the living room, but into his study. It was a room filled with blueprints, architectural models, and photographs of a lifetime of work. He walked over to the large window that overlooked the city skyline. He stood there for a long moment, his back to me. Then he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "I watched you tonight, Clara. I watched you fight." He turned to face me, his eyes shining with a love that 50 years had only deepened. All these years, people have seen me as the builder, the front man, but they were wrong. He took my hands in his. Buildings need a foundation, something strong and deep that holds everything up, something that doesn't crack under pressure. I always knew. You were the true foundation of this house, Clara. You always have been. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed all night finally welled in my eyes. Not tears of sorrow or anger, but of profound gratitude. He saw me. He had always seen me. This was why I fought. Not for the money, not for the power, but for this, for us, for the home we had built together both literally and figuratively. Later, after Arthur had gone to bed, exhausted from the emotional toll of the evening, I found myself drawn back to that same window. The city glittered below, a testament to a life of ambition and hard work. I thought of David. I thought of his bitter, insatiable hunger for what he believed was his right. He was obsessed with his inheritance, with the things he thought he was owed, simply by virtue of his birth. He saw the company, the houses, the money as prizes to be claimed. He never understood the legacy. A legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn every single day. It's in the reputation you build the trust, you foster the quality you refuse to compromise. It's the silent promise you make to your partners, your employees, and your clients. David wanted to own the kingdom, but he never understood what it meant to be its guardian. He wanted the crown, but he refused the responsibility it carried. They say a kingdom needs an heir. They are wrong. A kingdom needs a protector. Tonight the throne had not been passed down. It had been reclaimed, and the queen, once thought to be in the twilight of her reign, was just getting started. In life, we are all faced with a choice. Do we protect our feelings or do we protect our legacy? What would you have chosen?